Hello my dear friends, welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here today, and I hope you're safe, happy and ready to share a story that will truly touch your heart. You know, every time you join me here, it feels like we're sitting together as family, sharing moments, lessons and emotions that stay with us long after the video ends. So thank you for giving me your time again today. Now, let's begin. For years, a vast mansion stood at the edge of the city, its windows glowing with golden light, its gates locked tight from the world outside. Inside lived a man of unimaginable wealth, a millionaire who had everything anyone could dream of. But despite all the gold, power and status, his heart carried a wound that no doctor, no specialist and no amount of money could heal. His only daughter, a girl with bright eyes and a gentle smile, had never walked a single step since the day she was born. She had grown up watching other children run, dance and chase dreams, while she remained confined to her chair, and though her father poured his fortune into cures, treatments and therapies, nothing changed. But life has a way of bringing light through the most unexpected doors. One quiet evening, when hope had nearly faded from that home, the maid, a woman whose presence most people barely noticed, did something so simple yet so profound that it shook the walls of despair and planted a seed of miracle. The moment that followed would change not just the girl's life, but the hearts of everyone inside that mansion forever. But what could a maid possibly do that years of wealth, doctors and miracles could not? Before I take you deeper into this journey, I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe that sometimes the greatest miracles come from the people society overlooks? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next story we share together. The mansion at the top of the hill was a symbol of success. Marble floors gleamed, chandeliers sparkled like frozen rain, and luxury cars lined the driveway. To the outside world, the man who lived there was untouchable, a millionaire who had conquered business, power and influence. People whispered his name with admiration and envy. Yet behind the tall iron gates his life was far from perfect. His wealth could build hospitals, fund research, and hire the most brilliant doctors in the world, but it could not give his daughter the simple gift of walking. Her name was Isabella. She was 9 years old, with hair that glowed like sunlight, and a laugh that could melt even the coldest heart. But her world was confined to wheels, the polished wheelchair that carried her from bedroom to dining hall, from study to garden. She dreamed of chasing butterflies, of running into her father's arms, of twirling in a dress like the little girls she saw on television. But each morning she awoke to the same reality. Her legs refused to move. Her father, Richard, carried the weight of that sorrow like a stone chained to his chest. He had once been a man who smiled easily, but now his eyes often held a shadow. Every success in business felt hollow when he returned home and saw his daughter's small hands resting on the arms of her chair. Doctors came and went, some offered theories, others promised miracles for a price. Richard paid them all. Specialists flew in from other countries, studied her, shook their heads and left. The mansion's halls became lined with medical reports, abandoned therapies, and broken promises. And then there was the maid. Her name was Grace. She was in her early 30s, with steady hands and eyes that seemed to notice everything. She came from a quiet village far away, a place where people lived simply and helped one another without expectation of reward. In the mansion she blended into the background, dusting shelves, polishing silver, serving meals. Yet Isabella noticed her in ways others didn't. Grace was the only one who bent down to her level, spoke to her gently, and listened when she talked. While the world saw Isabella as fragile, Grace saw her as strong. While others pitied her, Grace treated her like any other child, and little by little, Isabella began to open up to her. One rainy afternoon, as Richard sat alone in his study, the sound of laughter drifted through the hall. It wasn't just Isabella's usual giggle, it was fuller, freer, carrying a spark of something he hadn't heard in years. When he stepped quietly into the room, he found Grace sitting cross-legged on the floor, showing Isabella how to clap a rhythm with her hands. The little girl's face was glowing, her cheeks flushed with joy. In that moment, Richard realized something. Grace had given his daughter more hope in a few hours than doctors had managed in years. And though he didn't yet know it, this quiet maid was about to do something that would break the chains of despair forever. But what exactly was Grace doing differently? Why did Isabella respond to her when she had shut out so many others? The days inside the mansion often followed the same rhythm, the ticking of clocks, the sound of rain against the tall windows, and the quiet wheels of Isabella's chair gliding across the polished floors. Most evenings Richard returned from his meetings with a heavy sigh, his tie loosened and his gaze distant. The silence of the house pressed down on him like a weight. But one afternoon, when the air smelled of fresh rain and the roses in the garden bent low with droplets, something unexpected stirred. Grace had rolled Isabella's chair to the music room, a grand space filled with instruments that rarely saw use. A piano rested in the corner, its keys covered with the velvet cloth. The room had always been a place of silence, until Grace lifted the cover and pressed a key. Grace asked gently. The little girl shook her head at first, shy and uncertain, but Grace was patient. She pressed a few more keys, turning sounds into a playful melody. Isabella's laughter bubbled up as Grace tapped out a silly tune, letting mistakes become part of the music. Finally, with hesitant fingers, Isabella reached out and touched a key herself. The sound echoed, delicate but alive, and for the first time she felt she had created something. From that day forward, the music room became their secret haven. Grace encouraged Isabella to clap, to tap her feet against the floor, not as therapy, but as fun, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, Isabella began moving muscles she had long forgotten. Her legs, which had always felt like lifeless branches, twitched when the rhythm became exciting. Grace noticed, though she said nothing. She only smiled and played louder. One evening Richard walked past the music room and froze. Isabella was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes, her small hands slapping the keys beside Grace's. For the first time in years he saw his daughter glowing with life instead of shadow. That night, as he stood by her bedside, Isabella whispered, "Papa, when I play with Grace I feel like my legs are listening." But as he left her room, a thought wouldn't leave him. Could it be possible that Grace, the maid he had once barely noticed, was doing something no doctor had achieved? He wanted to believe it. He was afraid to believe it. And while he wrestled with doubt, Grace continued, slowly, quietly, lovingly, helping Isabella take steps no one else could see. Something was awakening in Isabella, hidden beneath the laughter and the music. But could this fragile spark of movement truly grow into the miracle her father had longed for? The mansion's corridors had always been filled with quiet, the kind of silence that reminded Richard of everything he could not fix. Yet lately, faint sounds began to spill through the halls, laughter, clapping, the uneven rhythm of piano notes. Servants paused at doorways, listening with surprise. There was life returning to rooms that had been heavy for years. Grace never announced what she was doing. She simply wove joy into Isabella's days like a seamstress stitching bright thread through dull cloth. Sometimes she told her stories from her village, tales of children running barefoot through fields, chasing fireflies until the stars came out. Isabella listened with wide eyes, her imagination painting pictures of freedom she had never known. And then it happened. One morning, as Grace was showing her a game of tapping her feet to the beat of a song, Isabella's right leg jerked forward. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't controlled, but it moved. Isabella gasped and clutched Grace's arm, her face lit with shock and wonder. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Grace's heart pounded. "Yes, I did, my little one, I did." From that moment, the games became more than play. Grace began to guide Isabella with gentle persistence, encouraging her to press her toes against the ground, to stretch her legs while laughing, to lean forward as if her body was remembering something it had forgotten long ago. Isabella responded, sometimes with frustration, often with joy, but always with trust. Richard noticed the changes. At first he thought it was wishful thinking. Her cheeks looked fuller, her arms stronger, her eyes brighter. But then, one evening at dinner, he watched as Isabella shifted in her chair, her foot pressing against the floor as though testing it. The silver fork slipped from his hand. For years he had prayed for even the smallest sign, and now here it was, born not from hospitals or laboratories, but from a maid's kindness. Still doubt gnawed at him. Could this be real, or was his heart simply desperate to believe? He found himself lingering by the music room door, watching as Grace guided Isabella through clapping rhythms and foot taps. The way Isabella's body responded was undeniable. Something was changing. But change invites questions, and questions invite fear. One night, long after the mansion had gone quiet, Richard sat in his study staring at his daughter's old medical reports. Hundreds of pages declaring her condition irreversible, her legs destined never to move. Yet just upstairs, he had seen hope flicker alive. Could Grace truly be unlocking something science had failed to explain? And if so, what was she doing that no one else could? The mystery deepened with every passing day, pulling father and daughter closer to a truth neither of them was ready to face. Isabella's small steps forward were undeniable now. But miracles rarely come without challenges, and what Grace was awakening in the girl's heart and body was about to face its first great test. The air in the mansion had begun to change. Hope was no longer just a dream whispered into the dark. It lingered in the way Isabella smiled, in the way her laughter carried through the halls. But hope can be fragile, and not everyone welcomed it. One crisp morning, Richard called for yet another doctor, a specialist from abroad who had treated children with rare conditions. He wanted answers. He wanted proof that what he had been witnessing wasn't an illusion born of desperation. When the doctor arrived, Isabella was eager. She wanted to show him the little progress she had made with Grace. She pressed her toes against the ground, shifting her legs with effort. But instead of encouragement, the man shook his head, scribbling notes on his chart. Her movements are spasms, he declared flatly. They're not signs of real recovery. Don't build false hope. The child will never walk. Richard's jaw clenched, torn between rage and despair. Grace, standing quietly at the side, lowered her gaze but said nothing. That night Richard confronted her in his study. The rain battered against the windows as he paced the floor. "Tell me the truth, Grace," he demanded. "Are you filling her head with fantasies? Is this some trick to make her believe what isn't possible?" Grace's voice trembled, but her eyes held steady. "Sir, I've never promised her anything. I only give her joy, and joy makes her try. Isn't that worth something?" Richard turned away, his heart in turmoil. He had seen his daughter's feet press against the floor, seen her face light up with life. Yet the doctor's cold certainty echoed in his ears. Was Grace giving Isabella courage, or was she leading her toward heartbreak? Later that evening, Richard passed by Isabella's room and found her in tears. "Papa," she whispered, her voice breaking, "am I foolish for believing I might walk?" His chest ached. He wanted to promise her everything, to swear that miracles were real, but the weight of years of disappointment chained his words. He kissed her forehead and held her close, torn between doubt and love. And then came the moment that changed everything. The next morning, Richard entered the music room and froze. Isabella was standing, wobbling, trembling, her hands gripping Grace's arms, but she was upright. For the first time in her life, she was on her feet. Richard's heart pounded, his vision blurred. The scene before him shattered every word the doctor had spoken. But the question clawed at him. Was this the beginning of a miracle, or the calm before another devastating storm? Isabella had taken her first stand. But miracles often demand more than one moment of courage, and soon a storm of doubt, fear and resistance would test not only her, but everyone who loved her. What do you think? Should Richard trust the joy he sees in his daughter's eyes, or the cold certainty of the doctor's words? Share your thoughts below, because this is where the story truly begins to test hearts. Richard's heart wrestled with two voices, the one that told him to trust what he had seen with his own eyes, and the other, colder voice repeating the doctor's verdict. The staff whispered. Some said Grace was pushing the child too far. Others said she was working magic that no medicine could explain. Their words reached Isabella's ears, and slowly her bright smile began to fade. One evening, while practicing with Grace in the music room, Isabella lost her balance. She tried to take a small step, but her legs gave way, and she fell hard to the floor. The sound echoed through the mansion like thunder. Richard came running, his heart in his throat, only to find his daughter sobbing in Grace's arms. "I can't do it," Isabella cried, her small fists hitting the carpet. "It hurts too much. Everyone says it's impossible. Maybe I was foolish to believe." Richard dropped to his knees beside her, torn apart by the sight. His hands trembled as he lifted her back into her chair. He wanted to tell her to keep fighting, but his fear was stronger. What if the doctor was right? What if this struggle only brought her more pain? That night, Isabella locked herself in silence. She refused the piano, refused the games, refused even to look at Grace. Her laughter vanished, replaced by quiet tears hidden beneath her blanket. Richard, too, withdrew into himself. Alone in his study, he poured a glass of wine and stared at the walls lined with medical records. His wealth mocked him from the shadows. He could buy fleets of cars, islands in the sea, diamonds bigger than his fists. But he couldn't buy his daughter's healing. The helplessness tore him apart. Grace felt the weight too. She sat in her small room at the edge of the mansion, staring at her folded hands. Doubt crept in, whispering that maybe she had overstepped her place. Maybe the doctor was right. Maybe Richard's daughter would never walk, and all she had done was stir a fragile hope that would break the girl's heart. The mansion, once alive with music and laughter, fell silent again. The piano keys remained untouched, the games forgotten. Days stretched long, heavy and grey. It seemed as though the miracle had died before it had even begun. But miracles do not vanish so easily. Sometimes, when hope is buried, it returns in ways no one expects. Stronger, brighter, unshakable. And for Isabella, that return was closer than anyone realized. The silence in the mansion lingered for days. Isabella stayed in her room, staring out at the garden where roses bent under the weight of rain. She no longer reached for the piano or asked Grace to tell her stories. Her small world felt heavier than ever before. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Grace entered quietly with a tray of tea. Isabella didn't look up. She just whispered, "I'll never walk, Grace. Everyone knows it." Grace set the tray down and sat gently beside her. She didn't argue. She didn't try to cheer her with stories. Instead, she took Isabella's hand and placed it against her own chest. "Do you feel that?" she asked softly. Isabella nodded. "Your heart, beating strong," Grace said with a quiet smile. "Do you know what my grandmother used to tell me? That as long as your heart beats, there is strength inside you that hasn't been used yet. Sometimes it's hidden deep, but it's always there, and it waits for the moment you need it most." For the first time in days, Isabella's eyes lifted. "But what if I fail again?" Grace leaned closer. "Then you'll try again. Failing only means you're still fighting." The next morning, while the sky was still pale and soft with dawn, Isabella asked Grace to take her to the music room. The piano stood waiting, the velvet cover folded neatly back. But instead of playing, Isabella gripped the edge of her chair and said, "Hold me, Grace." Grace's heart raced as she slid her arms around the child. Slowly, carefully, Isabella pushed herself upward. Her legs trembled like reeds in the wind, but this time her eyes didn't hold fear, they held determination. One step, just a small one, then another, clumsy and awkward but real. Grace's tears blurred her vision as she whispered encouragement with every breath. From the doorway, unseen, Richard stood frozen. His hands shook against the frame as he watched his daughter move forward, fragile, unsteady, but undeniably walking. His chest ached, but for the first time in years, it ached with joy instead of sorrow. When Isabella collapsed into Grace's arms, her laughter rang out, bright and free. "I did it," she gasped. "I really did it." Grace hugged her tight. "Yes, my little one, you did." And from that moment something had changed, not just in Isabella's body, but in her spirit. The child who once believed she could never stand had tasted the truth. Her strength was greater than her fear. But courage, once awakened, always invites a test. And the greatest test of Isabella's life was just around the corner. If you were in Isabella's place, would you risk the pain of trying again after so many disappointments, or would you protect your heart by staying safe in what you already knew? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. The evening of Richard's birthday arrived quietly. The mansion glowed with golden light, tables set with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. Important guests filled the dining hall, each dressed in elegance, each expecting a night of fine food and celebration. Yet beneath the sparkle, Richard's heart was heavy. He had no desire for parties. His true wish had never been granted. Isabella had been wheeled into the hall by Grace, her small frame dressed in a soft blue gown. She looked delicate but radiant, a tiny spark in a sea of grandeur. Guests leaned toward one another, whispering about the child who had never walked. The heiress bound to her chair. Their words pricked Richard's heart like thorns. But Isabella's eyes shone with a quiet fire. She leaned close to Grace and whispered something only she could hear. Grace's face paled, then softened into a trembling smile. She nodded, squeezing Isabella's hand. The music began, soft and elegant, filling the room with a gentle hum. And then, as if the air itself held its breath, Isabella gripped the arms of her chair and pushed. The chatter hushed. Forks froze in mid-air. Every eye turned toward the child. Grace stood beside her, steadying her with firm but gentle hands. Isabella's legs shook, her knees bending like fragile branches. For a moment it seemed she might fall. Gasps rippled through the hall. But then a single trembling step. The silence broke into stunned cries. Another step, and then another. Isabella's face glowed with tears and laughter, her small feet moving clumsily, but surely across the polished floor. Richard rose to his feet, his vision blurred. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. His daughter, who had never walked a day in her life, was walking before his eyes. The guests stood, hands pressed to their mouths, some whispering prayers, others crying openly. Yet Isabella heard none of it. All she saw was her father's face, wet with tears, arms outstretched waiting for her. And with every ounce of strength in her tiny frame, she walked toward him. When she finally collapsed into his embrace, the hall erupted, not in applause but in sobs and whispers of awe. Richard clutched her tight, his voice breaking as he whispered, "You've done what I thought was impossible. My little girl, you've walked." And standing nearby, Grace lowered her head, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. She had been the quiet hand guiding Isabella, but the victory belonged to the child, and to the love that had never given up. The miracle had happened. But miracles are not just about steps taken. They are about the lives changed by them, and the days that followed would prove that this moment was only the beginning. The mansion was never the same after that night. Where silence once lingered, laughter now echoed. Isabella practiced her steps each day, sometimes stumbling, sometimes falling, but always rising again. Every step was a victory, and every smile was a reminder that miracles often arrive in the simplest of ways. Richard's heart softened in ways he never imagined. The weight he had carried for years was lifted, replaced with gratitude, not just for his daughter's courage, but for the maid who had given them both hope. Grace was no longer invisible. She was part of the family, her quiet strength honored and cherished. One afternoon, Richard stood in the garden watching Isabella walk hand in hand with Grace among the roses, his eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow but of joy. For the first time he understood that true wealth was not in his bank accounts, but in these moments, fragile, precious and real. Isabella, her small face glowing in the sunlight, turned to her father and said, "Papa, I told you my legs were listening." He laughed through his tears, nodding, "Yes, my little one, and now the whole world is listening." Do you believe that sometimes love and patience can unlock what science and money cannot? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I can't wait to read them. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share and subscribe so we can keep walking through more stories together.